All right, well, hello everybody, and welcome once again to Paxton House. I really appreciate you coming, and hello to everybody tuning in, wherever you might be tuning in from, on the live stream. This is very exciting. If you are tuning in on the live stream, I just want to say that it's totally free to watch, but if you've enjoyed tonight, then you can make a donation via the donation link in the description below the video of the live stream. Now, I'd like to start tonight by asking you all a question. Can a poem or a painting or another work of art be successfully transformed into a piece of piano music? Have a think about that. You know, can a piece of music capture the essence of an artwork? And actually, I want you to answer that question. So, in a minute, I'll ask you to raise your hand if you think yes, it can, no, it can't, or also maybe you don't know, you're not sure. Okay. So, hands up for yes. Who thinks a poem or a painting the essence can be captured in a piece of piano music? Hands up for yes. No right or wrong answer. Okay. Yeah. Hands up for no. You think it cannot. Yeah, thank you. I appreciate your honesty. And hands up for you if you're not sure. Okay, great. So for people tuning in via the live stream, it was actually quite a majority of people thought you can capture the essence of a painting or a poem through music. A couple thought no, and a few weren't sure. Well, tonight I'm going to explore this question, and it relates to a larger question of, can music actually express anything at all outside of itself? I think most of us would agree that music can express a mood. You know, we listen to music and it can make us feel happy or sad. But can music express something more concrete? Say, can it represent a waterfall? Could music represent a sunset? These are more complicated debates that have been going on for decades and actually hundreds of years. And tonight, I'll be performing my freshly composed Caledonian Portraits, all of which attempt to translate art into music. So, what are these Caledonian Portraits? Well, they're a set of 8 new piano pieces, which I've composed over the last 8 months, and each piece is in response to a particular poem or painting or other artwork. And these 8 other creative works are all created by artists living and working in Scotland today. I don't know if you can tell, but I wasn't actually born in Scotland myself. My wife and I moved to the Scottish borders 3 years ago, 3 years to the very day, in fact. We moved here on the 10th of March, 2020. And this project is my way of celebrating and connecting with the huge range of artistic talent which is sort of emanating out of this great country, which I'm delighted to live in now. All 8 of the artists involved, I managed to interview them all, which was fantastic, as what they told me really impacted on how I composed my pieces and really, really helped. And as you can tell, I will be doing a bit of talking tonight. I hope that's okay. I'm going to introduce each piece, talk a bit about it, and hopefully shed a bit of light on the composing process along the way. So, on to the first piece. The first piece I'll play tonight is a piece which is inspired by a painting by Kirstie Cohen. It's a painting called Blue Clouds. By the way, all these artworks or poems are featured in the concert program. I think you've all got a copy, so feel free to have a look if you wish. Blue Clouds. This painting has 3 main elements. We have a cloud, we have light shining through the canvas, and we have the sea below. And in my piece, I try to capture and combine these 3 elements. The cloud seems to me to be a sort of very mysterious element in the painting. It's concealing whatever's behind it. And in my music, I tried to create melodies that don't really go anywhere, harmonies that never quite resolve to represent the cloud. Then we have this light shining through the canvas. And listen out for any suddenly loud major chords. That's my idea of sort of trying to get the clarity of the light coming through. And then we have a really dark sea at the bottom of the painting, very dark, almost black, and there's a sort of disturbance going on in the water, under the water. And that seems very threatening to me. So about halfway through my piece, you might hear a threatening ostinato pattern low down in the left hand. That's representing the disturbance going on in the sea there. One thing Kirstie told me in our interview was that she sometimes uses a palette knife to apply paint directly to the canvas, as opposed to a paintbrush. And I wanted to try to capture that in the music somehow. A palette knife is quite hard, sort of sharp compared to a paintbrush. So I thought octaves, quite a hard sound. So if you listen out for some running octaves, first in the right hand, then the left, and then together, that's my idea of Kirstie using the palette knife to apply the paint. Anyway, I hope you enjoy my piece, which is called Epiphany over Dark Waters. Thank you very much. The second piece I'll play tonight is inspired by a poem. It's a fantastic poem by Janette Ayachi, and the poem is called Sea Rattle. It's about the sea, as you might have guessed. It's about the power of the sea. It is from this great poetry collection that Janette has released quite recently, Hand Over Mouth Music, available in all good bookstores, and I highly recommend it. It's the last poem, actually, in the collection. I'll talk a little bit about it and how I responded to Janette's poem, and then I'll read a short excerpt. So when I was speaking to Janette about her poem, she told me that there's one word in particular that's very important. It's the word oscillation. It occurs at the end of the poem. And that was so great for me to hear, because it gave me my initial idea of how I would begin my composition. I thought I'd create a musical oscillation to sort of represent the importance of that word, but also to represent the sound of the sea. So I took 3 notes. You know, in an oscillation, you have a sort of you have a central point, and you have a movement up and down above the center, around the central point. So in music, I took a note, F, and a note above, A flat, and a note below, C. And those were the notes of my musical oscillation. Who knows, anyone know what chord we get from F, A flat, and C? F minor, well done, exactly. So we hear an F minor chord spread out in the right hand. And that oscillation is sort of quite hypnotic in sound. It goes on and on, much like how the sea, you know, the tide comes in and out forever. Quite hypnotic, if you've ever stood and listened or watched the sea for any length of time. Quite hypnotic. But the sea's never the same from one moment to the next. You know, it's always subtly changing. So I add notes to this F minor oscillation, take notes away, things gradually shift. I asked Janette about the meaning of the title, Sea Rattle, and she said, "It is the thunderous sound of the ocean crashing in to greet you when you are prohibited from reaching it," which I thought was a great explanation. The thunderous sound of the ocean crashing in to greet you when you're prohibited from reaching it. And in my piece, we hear the thunderous sound of the ocean in bar 29. Now, without the sheet music, I'll be impressed if you all knew when bar 29 comes along, but I'll give you a clue as to what to listen out for. In the previous bar, bar 28, we hear the first silence in the piece. You know, until then, the oscillation's going round and round, constantly moving. But listen out for that silence, and after that, we get bar 29. And my idea, anyway, of the thunderous sound of the ocean. I think I'll read a few lines now. I won't read the entire poem. There had been a hope that Janette might be able to come tonight herself to read the poem, which would have been brilliant, but sadly she couldn't make it. Okay, I'll read the ending of the poem. So, just to give you an idea. I bolt my doors as the paint starts to peel. A flock of gulls crash their beaks against glass. The sea rattles, then roars. Furniture soon floats to the ceiling. Like a spell, water funnels up the chimney. Light sizzles, then burns out. Moons flag on the horizon. I start to wonder how long before everything is engulfed. The fumes are quick. Eyes adjust to the sting. Lungs inflate and learn to speak. I hold my breath, listen to their oscillations, and swim towards the sky. And I love that ending. So basically what's happened earlier on is we learn that the narrator of the poem is in their home, the sea's flooding in, and apparently they're staying in their home. They're not escaping. And at the end of the poem they're swimming towards the sky. So now are we meant to believe that's really happening? Or, is it metaphorical? I love poems like that and endings like that. And in my piece, I tried to create an ending where we're left wondering, well, what is going on here musically? We hear this oscillation again, but the rhythm starts to shift in the left hand. The time signature changes, and the predictability of the left hand goes out the window. We don't know where we are. It's almost like we're going from dry land onto the sea, or like we're having the rug pulled out from under us. At least that's what I'm trying to create musically. So yes, fantastic poem, recommend this book. And I've named my piece, How Long Before Everything is Engulfed, which is a line from the poem. So I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much. So on to piece number 3 now, third of my Caledonian Portraits. This one was inspired by a sculpture by Michelle de Bruin, who I'm delighted to say is here tonight. Hello, Michelle. Thank you for being here. And you might have seen Michelle's sculpture because it's here. We have it here. The sculpture is called Marella Splendens. I'll just say a little bit about it before I talk about how I created my piece. So Marella Splendens is Michelle's representation of this tiny creature that was found fossilized in the Burgess Shale in the Canadian Rockies. And this fossil was discovered in the early 20th century. And at first, naturalists didn't know what it was. they were very confused. It didn't seem to relate to any pre-existing taxonomic classifications. They didn't know how the body parts connected, which way up it went. They didn't know much about it. And Michelle had the wonderful idea to try to create a representation of this creature. And she actually went to the Smithsonian Institute in Washington, D.C. to look at the fossils firsthand before she created this amazing sculpture. These creatures were, in reality, they're very small, about the size of a postage stamp, I think. But Michelle's really enlarged, obviously, the creature here for her sculpture. And one of my favourite things about it is it's not carved out of a single block of stone. It's carved out of a few different segments that you can put together in different ways, representing the fact that we don't know really quite how this creature went together. That's one of the main ways I organised my composition. I decided to create 5 different sections that can be put together in any order. Tonight I'll perform them in the order I composed them, but they can be put together in any order. So I'll say a few words about each of the 5 movements just briefly before I perform them. So the first movement was inspired by the sound of Michelle actually chiseling away at the sculpture. I was lucky enough to go along to Michelle's studio, and I listened to her chiseling, and I recorded the sound. And it turns out she chisels in a sort of a rhythm of 3. It's like a 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Sometimes two groups of 3 together. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's what you hear at the start. You hear that rhythm in the left hand. What you hear next is a melody emerging in the right hand. And this represents the sculpture coming out of the block of stone, the beauty emerging from what was just a block of stone before. The second movement, we hear these long rising and falling legato lines, which represent the graceful curves of Marella over there. Also, we hear some quite strange harmonies. I tried to create some otherworldly kind of harmonies to go along with Marella's kind of strange, almost alien appearance. In the third movement, it's maybe my favourite one. I tried to imagine if Marella had a personality, if these creatures had a personality, what would it be like? I thought they'd be quite bombastic. I thought they'd have a sense of humour in a kind of bizarre way. And I thought they'd be pretty confident. I thought they'd be pretty sure of themselves. So that's what we'll hear in the third movement. Now, the fourth gave me a lot of trouble. The fourth I decided to compose as a musical palindrome. So it's the same forwards as it is backwards, like the word race car. And it turns out it's quite hard to write a musical palindrome. The reason I did it is because Michelle told me that she had to make certain assumptions about this creature as she was creating her sculpture. And one of the assumptions was that she had to assume there was a line of symmetry somewhere through the creature. So I thought, great, I'll create a symmetrical piece of music. How hard can it be? And many composers have done it. J.S. Bach's done it, Haydn, Schoenberg, many composers. So I sat down, and each time I tried to write a few bars to start the piece, I played them backwards as the ending, and they sounded terrible. So it took a long time. I'm not sure I'll ever write one again, but that's what you'll hear. That's what you'll hear in the fourth movement. And see if you can listen out for when the music starts to go backwards. And finally, the fifth movement represents how Marella might have moved around in her natural environment. These were swimming creatures, aquatic creatures, and naturalists think perhaps they used a backstroke kind of motion to swim, but they don't really know. Also, there's a bit of inspiration from the French composer Erik Satie in the fifth movement, and that's because he was composing at the same time that Marella was discovered, roughly the same time, but also he was a well-known eccentric. He was a real oddball, and I can't help but think that he and Marella would have got on. He famously was a recluse. He lived in a tiny apartment that was apparently the size of a large wardrobe, and yet he managed to fit over 100 umbrellas in this apartment. He founded his own religion, of which he was the only member, and apparently he only ate food that was white, but I don't think that last one's true. But anyway, he was really eccentric, and I think he and Marella would have got on. So we hear a bit of influence of Satie in the fifth movement. So there we are. So I hope you enjoy my composition, which I've called 5 Tunes for an Extinct Morella Morph. Thank you very much. And thanks again to Michelle for creating such an inspiring sculpture. Fantastic. Next piece I play will be the last piece before we take a short break. I have an interval. And before I talk about it, I'll just say that all the pieces I'm playing tonight are an example of what we could call musical ekphrasis. Now, ekphrasis is a term that means a verbal or written description of a work of art. And you might know it goes way back to the ancient Greeks. One of the earliest examples often cited is Homer in the Iliad, Book 18. There's an amazingly detailed description of the sort of artistic design on the shield of Achilles. So this is one of the earliest examples of this technique, ekphrasis. Now, musical ekphrasis, of course, is the same thing, but we're trying to describe an artwork in music. And this has been going on for a long time too. And a common example that you might have heard of is pictures at an exhibition. This suite of 10 piano pieces by Mussorgsky, each piece meant to represent a different painting in a gallery by Victor Hartmann. You might know Ravel's orchestrated version. You might even know the version by the 1970s prog rock supergroup Emerson, Lake and Palmer. Musical ekphrasis. So I've been interested in turning poems or paintings into music before I knew there was a name for it. But I was pleased to discover there is a name for it, musical ekphrasis. Now, my next piece is inspired by a painting by Peter King, a painting called Autumn Reflections, Arran. Peter lives on the Isle of Arran, and he often uses his natural environment to inspire his paintings. In this painting, we have a view of Goat Fell, the highest point on the Isle of Arran. Beautiful view with some really bold colours, some bold oranges and yellows, and it's all reflected in the water at the bottom of the painting. I had a great chat with Peter via Zoom, and one of the things he told me was about his method, and he said he thinks he's most successful in his paintings when he doesn't think too much about them, but just goes for it with confidence. He doesn't try to be too clever. He tries to say a lot with very little, and in his words, he doesn't tickle the canvas, but he attacks it. So I thought, great, I'll try and do the same. I will sit down, I'll confidently compose this piece. It won't take long. I won't tickle the notes. I'll attack them, and didn't work. Whatever I was coming up with just didn't seem to match the vividness and the life that was in Peter's painting. So in the end, I had to spend quite a lot of time on it. And yes, that technique didn't work for me, but it was worth a try. What I did do is I wanted to create a really simple thematic idea. I did that in two ways. Firstly, I took the mountain in the painting, Goat Fell, and it's a very obvious idea, but mountains go up and then down. So I thought I'll create a melodic themes that tend to go up and then down. And also, I'll let you in on a trick I use sometimes if I'm trying to generate material, ideas for a piece. If I'm a bit stuck, I look at whatever is inspiring me, and I see, are there any musical notes in the name of whatever is inspiring me? So the name of the mountain in this painting, Goat Fell, we have G and F, Goat Fell. Aha, they're two musical notes, G, F, so I just used them. My piece starts with a G going up to an F. That's the very first thing you'll hear. And throughout the piece, we have this little musical signature of Goat Fell. The harmonies I used, I decided to modulate quite a lot. That's where we don't stay in one key, but we borrow notes from other keys. We suggest other keys. And because Peter's painting was so vivid, I thought, yes, we have to go on a journey here. So we started in F major, but then the piece modulates to keys like D major, E flat major, C major later on. And it also goes to what's called the Lydian mode. Now, the Lydian mode, what we do is we sorry if this is getting a bit technical, but I think it is interesting. We take a major scale, and who knows, maybe someone knows, what do we do to a major scale to turn it into the Lydian mode? Anybody?
Sharp chord.
Correct, sir. We sharpen the fourth. Yes. That has the effect of making it sound brighter, right? It's like a super bright major scale. perfect for Peter's painting, you know, the oranges and the yellows. So that's what we hear. We hear the Lydian mode, this extra bright sort of scale. What we don't hear very much of is what we'd call a sort of a root position tonic chord in the key of F. Now all that means is it's the chord we hear that sounds like, right, we're home. This is a safe chord, we're stable now. And usually we hear it quite a lot. If a piece is in the key of F, we hear lots of F chords. I decided to try to not use many for the reason that if let's say you're off on a walk up Goat Fell on the Isle of Arran, you're enjoying yourself, or maybe you're in an art gallery enjoying looking at paintings, you don't want to stop. You don't want to stop and go back home to safety. You want to keep experiencing what you're experiencing. So I tried to avoid these safe, comfortable chords and tried to keep the piece developing, to keep us on a journey, to keep everything sounding fresh. And yes, I hope you enjoyed this piece. It is called Fantasia on a View of Goat Fell. Thank you very much. We'll take a short interval of 20 minutes. I'm not going to go and hide away in a dark room. I'm going to stay around and mingle. So yes, 20 minutes, and see you at the bar. Thank you.
Greg, just to say there's a running race up and down. Go.
Oh, it's there. Oh, nice. Do it. Okay. Yeah, hold on. I've got a bit of work.
surviving? From one of me.
Hello again. I hope you're all suitably refreshed after the interval. And hello again to people tuning in on the live stream. Just make sure everybody's phones are still off. Yes, after the interval. Thank you. As you will have noticed, I'm talking a fair bit about each piece before I perform. And there's a few reasons for that. One is that I'm trying to create a sort of a classical concert experience that isn't too formal. You know, some classical concerts, as good as they are, they can be fantastic. They can be a bit too stuffy sometimes, you know, when there's an atmosphere of reverence and you're not allowed to utter a word, and the performers come on, do their thing, do it brilliantly, and they leave, and you haven't heard a word from anybody. And, you know, that can be all well and good. But I always think it's lovely to hear from the performer or the composer or the conductor or somebody, just to humanize the event and to hear a bit of context. So that's what I'm trying to do tonight. Also, I'm trying to hopefully shed a little light on what it is to compose music. You know, for me, it's not a matter of divine inspiration, you know, and I think not for many composers, if they're honest. It's a matter of sort of craft, you know, and trying things out. And year after year, if you keep going, hopefully you hopefully improve and begin to develop a style. And it's a lifelong journey. But, you know, I know plenty of musicians who are sort of tentative. They want to compose, but they don't feel they can. But if you are a musician, just compose something, you know. Go for it, because it's great fun, and I think more people should try it. Anyway, back to the music, back to my Caledonian Portraits. The first piece I'll perform in the second half is inspired by a poem called Daedalus on Speed by J.L. Williams. It's an amazing poem, and it's very long. I'm tempted to use the word sprawling in the best possible sense. It's got such a vast array of subject matter, huge amount of different images, image piled upon image. It's about the story of Icarus and Daedalus, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. And it's about a specific moment in that story where, you know, they're flying away from the Minotaur, with their wings made of wax and feathers. They're going over the sea. Icarus goes too close to the sun. And, of course, his wings start to melt and well, spoiler alert, he dies. You know, he crashes down into the sea and he dies. And in Jennifer's poem, she tries to capture the moment where Daedalus has just noticed that his son is about to die. And in that moment, sort of Daedalus's life, in Jennifer's poem, Daedalus's life flashes before his eyes. Sort of like when you're about to die, it is said that your life flashes before your eyes. I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what happens in Jennifer's poem. But more than that, not just his own life flashes before his eyes, but the entirety of existence flashes before his eyes. The entirety of what's happening in the world enters his mind in a very intense and overpowering way. And as I was chatting to Jennifer over Zoom about this, and she was explaining it to me, it reminded me strongly of one of my favourite short stories by the Argentine author Jorge Luis Borges. And he's got this fantastic story called The Aleph. I highly recommend you read it if you haven't. And in The Aleph, there is a small iridescent globe hidden in a cellar. And if anybody looks into this globe, you see in an instant everything that's happening on Earth. And so this came into my mind, and I was about to say this to Jennifer, but then she said to me, oh yes, and I was inspired by The Aleph. So I love moments like that when two people sort of connect with a shared love of something. And there's a lot of the Aleph in Jennifer's amazing poem. I think I'll read a bit for you now. I wish I could read the whole thing. I wish Jennifer was here to read the whole thing, but it would be far too long. But I'll just read a few lines, and you'll hopefully get a sense of the intensity. I hate to use the term stream of consciousness, but it sort of is image after image after image. I'll read a few lines now. And actually, what I'm about to read, I've taken my title of this piece from the first line here. I think it's the longest title of any of my pieces tonight. I'm quite a fan of a long title. You know, short titles like prelude number 2, well, it's a bit boring, isn't it? I mean, what's it telling us? But I've called my piece, after this first line, "Of the alphabet that bleaches to unintelligible dust." What a great line. So this is just a short section of Daedalus on speed. "Of the alphabet that bleaches to unintelligible dust, on these ill-strangling, petrol head fumed fear, driving you, her, to the window, a dyslexic moth looking to drown, not burn, for fear of sound of its own wings, being torn to ghostly films of vanishing somnambulists. It is so hard to write now, but cannot sleep, faces. The retina is coloured, oil slicked on spilt water. Would salt make a difference to your perceptive of my cherished crusaders' tooth-shaped crooks of wounds? The retina floats in the gelled amorphous womb of the deep-sea eye. That is just a pre-recollection of what becomes more interesting, memory's artistic flexibility." I love that last idea, memory's artistic flexibility. But you see how intense it is, just image after image. So I was totally in awe of this poem, which, by the way, you can read online. It's published in an online literary journal. It's not in a book, but if you do want to read any of Jennifer's poetry, I recommend this book, After Economy. It's a fantastic collection of her poetry. But when I first read the poem, I thought, I'm going to have to write a piece that is, I don't know, an hour long to fit everything in, to try to represent the world. But that was too much for the scope of this project, so I couldn't do that. So I thought, what can I do? Well, I'll tell you a few things I did in trying to get Jennifer's poem into a piano piece. Jennifer sent me a recording of herself reading the poem, which was hugely helpful. So I tried to translate some of the rhythms of her reading it into rhythms in the piano. And she even almost sung a few lines. And when she was almost singing, she was sort of on the notes B and F sharp. So I used those notes a lot in my composition. Also, she clearly is inspired by older stories, you know, the story of Icarus and Daedalus, the story of the Aleph. So I thought I would try to hark back a bit to earlier music as well. And I was actually inspired by the Storm section of Vivaldi's Four Seasons. Very intense piece of music, quite a well-known intense piece of music, very powerful. And I thought, well, yeah, what Daedalus is going through in that moment is incredibly powerful. And rather than create a storm, I thought I'd create the eye of the storm, you know, a sort of stillness, and you get a sense of intensity all around. That's what I'm trying to do in the middle of this piece. So, hope you enjoy Of the Alphabet That Bleaches to Unintelligible Dust. you very much. The next piece I'll play now is inspired by the work of Claire Cunningham. Claire is a performer and creator of multidisciplinary work. She is a disabled artist whose work often explores the use and misuse of her crutches. And the particular piece of work that inspired me was a show she created called Guide Gods. I'm calling it a show. It's a sort of theatre show, but it takes in dance, it takes in music. It's almost a lecture as well at times. But it explores a sort of controversial topic, potentially. It looks at the intersection between religion and disability, and the view that the major world religions take on disability itself. And Claire explores certain questions. Is disability the will of a higher power? Is it a punishment for sins committed, in this life or a previous life? Is it a test to be endured? These are views that certain religions have. And in Claire's show, she manages to very thoughtfully, cleverly, and with a lot of humour explore these issues. And she uses a lot of music in her show, which is one of the things that drew me to it. She's actually a trained singer herself, and she sings beautifully. And a couple of pieces of music from her show really worked their way into my composition. One is the song As I Went Down to the River to Pray. You might have come across it in various places, but maybe in the film Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? And the other piece of music, I first came across it in primary school. I think a lot of us learn it in primary school. Lord of the Dance. You'll hear these two pieces transformed to a greater or lesser extent in the middle of my composition. And I've named my piece The Good Old Way, which is a bit of the lyric from As I Went Down to the River to Pray. Religion is often seen as the good old way, traditional. So in my piece, I wanted it to sound quite traditional to start off with. There's no crazy harmonies. It's quite conventional. It doesn't really modulate. It modulates a tiny little bit, but not much for a while. So that's me saying, okay, we've got this traditional thing. And then in the middle, when I start to tease apart these two pieces of music I mentioned, and I start to change them and challenge them, that's the idea of, okay, we don't have to just go along with this traditional idea. We can question it. We can say, okay, maybe these views need challenging or questioning. So that's the middle of my piece. And then, because Claire is a singer, I wanted my piece to almost be like a song. So I hope you'll hear that we have a right hand, which is like a sung melody. It could be sung, in fact, and the left hand is an accompaniment. And we hear this for a while, and then after a little bit, we sort of hear a verse and a chorus in a way, and then we hear a verse and a chorus again, but the right hand is harmonized. We have two-part harmony. So you could interpret that in one of two ways. You could have a religious interpretation. You could say, okay, when we've got the single voice, it's just one person expressing their thoughts. And when we have the second voice added, they are in communion with their god or their gods. Or we could have a secular interpretation. Well, when the second voice is added, it's someone communing with a friend, with another human being. So I will now perform The Good Old Way. Thank you. So now, just before I play my next piece, I just need to say a big thank you to Creative Scotland, who have actually supported this project. They've supported the composition of the pieces as well as the concert tonight. So, you know, we wouldn't all be here without their support. So thank you to Creative Scotland. Also, I'd like to thank my Patreon supporters who have also contributed to the composition of these pieces. For those that don't know, Patreon is a fantastic online platform. I'll just say a few quick words about it, where you can support the work of artists who you appreciate. Could be musicians, composers, filmmakers, anything. And how it works is you become a member. You commit, you know, a few pounds a month or more to support the work of artists who you appreciate, and then in return you get certain rewards. So for my Patreon supporters, every month I send out the sheet music and an audio recording of my new compositions. It's at least one piano piece a month I've been doing for the last 2 or 3 years now. So my Patreon supporters get the sheet music and the audio, and a link to a video where they can hear the piece, well, watch the piece, watch the sheet music, scroll through on a video, and they get that 1 week before anyone else hears the music. And other rewards too. In the sort of higher membership tiers, you can get sheet music in the post, should you desire that, and you can even get personal commissions. So if you're enjoying, you know, the music tonight and want to support what I do, then please, you know, consider becoming a Patreon supporter. Thank you. So I'll go on to talk about my next piece now, which is inspired by the work of Lara Scobie, who's a ceramicist. She makes these beautiful vessels, and she tends to use black and white as her main colours. But occasionally she uses a bright colour alongside the black and white. And in the case of large oval vessel, which has inspired my next piece, she's used a really bright yellow. So we have black and white and this bright yellow. And that came straight into my piece in the choice of key. So I thought, well, we'll start off in the key of G minor. To me, that's sort of black and white. You know, G minor is a key with 2 flats, minor, kind of dark, okay. But then we go to F sharp major, an incredibly bright key, 6 sharps. That represents the bright yellow in this piece of Lara's. So you'll hear quite an abrupt transition in the middle to F sharp major, and then back to G minor. Although I suppose strictly it's not G minor, because I remember earlier I mentioned the Lydian mode, where we had a sharpened 4th, as the gentleman over here knew, and that made a major scale sound brighter. Well, in the minor scale, we can potentially alter the 6th note and raise that, and we get a different mode. I wonder if anybody knows if we have a minor scale. Dorian, correct. Very well done. So actually, really, I'm using G Dorian, and that has the effect of it slightly brightens a minor key. It's not quite so dark, because, you know, this is, at the end of the day, it's a beautiful piece of ceramics. I didn't want it to be too dark and dingy, so by changing that single note, it's just a little more, it's a little brighter. It's not quite so dark. Now, when I interviewed Lara, she mentioned a technique she uses called sgraffito, which I hadn't heard of. And what this technique is, it's where, I hope I'm getting this right, it's where you build up 2 layers, potentially of clay or of colour, and then you scrape through the outer layer to reveal the layer underneath. And I thought that's a great thing I could do with my music. So I've sort of built up some chords which have a more dissonant layer, sort of on the outside, and then we scrape through to a more purer, just straightforward major or minor sound. So we'll get that a bit in my piece. I also wanted to write something where it feels like to the player, you're sort of sculpting the piece as you go. So I started off with these octaves in each hand, and the hands gradually get closer and closer together until, first of all, the right hand's under the left, and then it's on top. You're sort of sculpting the pieces you play. And I hope these pieces are played by other pianists, you know, whether that's students learning piano or professional pianists. And the sheet music for these pieces is all available online. So anybody watching via the live stream, if you want to play these pieces, head to gregharradine.com and you can find the sheet music. I'd love to hear some other people play these pieces. I really would. Yes, so I'm trying to sculpt the notes as I'm playing. I think it's time now to hear the piece. So I've named this piece Vessel of Many Forms. So we've come to the time of the evening where I'm soon going to play the last piece, the last of my Caledonian Portraits. Just please indulge me, before I do, I should say a few quick thank yous. First of all to Mel and everybody here at Paxton House for letting me use this amazing venue, which is just so perfect for a concert of music inspired by art. You know, such a fantastic room. So thank you to everybody here. Thank you to Tom, who's doing such a good job with the live stream. Really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching at home who are tuning in. You know, let me know if you're there. Leave a comment so I can have a read tomorrow. Thank you to everybody who's come tonight. I want to thank Kate Benjamin for designing such a good concert program and poster. Thank you to Danny Bonner for doing some brilliant filming and photography in the weeks leading up to this. Thank you to my wife Helen for supporting me in 1,001 different ways, and for putting up with hearing these pieces thousands of times as I wrote and rewrote them. And thank you, a huge thank you to the 8 artists whose work inspired me. I think only 1 or 2, definitely 1, possibly 2, could be here tonight. But thank you. You know, if I've even captured a tiny glimmer of you know, what you've created, then I'll feel like I've been successful. This last piece I'm going to play is inspired by the work of Tom Davidson, who is a artist based in Earlston, where I live. So I thought it was fitting to end with a piece most local to me. When Helen and I moved to Earlston, a few months later, we visited Tom in his gallery. He's been there since 1995, and we loved his work. And we actually bought a lino cut of his called Dapple Road, which is hanging in our hallway. And that's the piece that's inspired this final piece. It's a bucolic scene. It's a beautiful lino cut of a quiet country road in a place called Boone, which is just a few miles north of Earlston, to the east of the A68. And the way Tom works with his lino cuts, you may be familiar with the lino cut technique. He sort of takes a block of lino, scrapes away a layer, and then prints the first layer with 1 or maybe 2 colours. He then scrapes away another layer of lino, prints another layer, and he builds up maybe 5 or 6 layers in this way. And I thought that's a great technique I can mirror in my composition. So I came up with a sort of folk-like melody, which we initially hear unadorned, just a single melody. And then we hear it again, but with a second layer underneath, so 2-part harmony. We then hear it again with 3-part harmony, and so on up to 5 layers. And the melody really doesn't change. It is the same every time. So that initial printing of the first layer is there. So it's a sort of theme and variations in structure, apart from the theme doesn't vary at all. The harmony is what varies. I stick with this pretty rigidly, except in the 5th layer, I bring it back to 2-part harmony just for a bit of variety. Tom is also very careful about his choice of colour in his artworks, and he doesn't use more than 5 or 6 or maybe 7 colours maximum. So I thought I'd give myself a challenge by only using 6 different notes on the piano for this piece. I'm using the first 6 notes of an A major scale. So A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. So who can tell me which note is missing from that A major scale? G sharp, exactly. So you won't hear a G sharp in this piece. And that was quite hard because that note, G sharp, is important. The 7th note of the scale is very important. It comes up all the time, especially in the dominant chord. So it was a challenge, but it was quite an enjoyable challenge. It wasn't as tricky as the musical palindrome back from Michelle's piece. This one was an enjoyable challenge. So I hope you enjoy this piece, which I've called Arcadian Air. And if you hear a G sharp, you know something's gone wrong. I'm quite fond of the tradition of an encore. You know, I don't mind that from the classical concert tradition. You know, it's nice to hear one more piece. Anyway, thanks again for coming. I really appreciate you all being here and tuning in at home. The last piece I'll play now is, I think it's the very first piece I wrote that was inspired by another piece of creation, something else artistic. This piece is called 3 Chords for Calliope, and it's inspired by a couple of lines from Dante's The Divine Comedy. The lines are, "And here, Calliope, strike a higher key, accompanying my song with that sweet air." And I took these lines quite literally, where Dante's asking Calliope to strike a higher key, and in my composition, I'm constantly trying to reach for higher keys in the right-hand melody. It's quite appropriate that Dante was invoking Calliope, because she is the muse of epic poetry. And my piece, as the title says, it just has 3 chords in the whole thing. We have these 3 chords, if you want to know, they are G minor 7, F major 7, and then E flat major. 2 bars on each, goes round and round, and that's the whole thing. But the harmony, the melody changes gradually, the chords are played in different ways, but it's just these 3 chords going round and round. So thanks again, hope you enjoy this final piece. If you've enjoyed the music, on your way out there is a mailing list sign-up form, so if you leave your email address, you can be informed of future concerts and compositions of mine, and afterwards I will see you at the bar. So thank you.